Welcome back to These Things Are Written on. This Wednesday, we are wrapping up Micah chapter 1. This continues the lament. The overview were the last two verses that we read yesterday, and today we hear the rest of the lament. Let's take a look, starting verses 10 and 11. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all, in Beth-le-apharah. Roll yourself in the dust, pass on your way, inhabitants of Shaphir, in nakedness and shame. The inhabitants of Zanan, do not come out. The lamentations of Beth-hazel shall take away from you its standing place. Okay, so what is all of this about? Okay, this is one of those times when in the English it doesn't quite compute the same way as it does in the Hebrew, because there's a lot of wordplay going on. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. I couldn't find anything on that wordplay, but the next one is really what it starts. In Beth-le-apharah, roll yourself in the dust. Apharah sounds like the Hebrew word for dust. So he's connecting those. In Beth-le-apharah, roll yourself in the apharah, the dust. It's connecting those words together with how they sound. Pass on your way, verse 11, inhabitants of Shaphir. That means beautiful city. But the inhabitants of Shaphir, of this beautiful city, are in nakedness and shame. They are not beautiful. Inhabitants of Zanan, do not come out. Again, that name Zanan doesn't quite sound or sounds similar to the word for coming out or being set out. So you see that in the Hebrew, there would be a little bit more of the poetry sounding similar words than we have here. The last one, the same way, the laments of Beth-hazel. Shall take away from you its standing place. Again, Hazael and its standing place sound similar. So that's the word picture we have there. We'll talk more about all of these places at the end. I'm going to bring up a map and kind of show some of these places. We don't know where all of them are, but it's interesting when we see where they do set. So let's continue with verse 12. For the inhabitants of Moroth wait anxiously for good, because disaster has come down from the Lord to the gates of Jerusalem. This is the center of the lament. And in the center of the lament is Jerusalem. All of this is pointing to what is happening there. Disaster coming down from the Lord. The inhabitants of Moroth wait anxiously for good. Again, some similarity in the sound there. But they wait for good, but this is what is happening. Disaster is coming from the Lord to the city, to the gates of Jerusalem. Why? Again, it goes back to what we heard earlier, that Jerusalem has begun to worship false gods and celebrate them in the high place of Jerusalem, which is set apart for the worship of God. That is the problem. Let's continue with verse 13. And just like verse 10 starts with kind of an imperative, so does 13. Actually, throughout it does this. Verse 13, harness the steeds of the chariots, inhabitants of Lachish. It was in the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, for in you were found the transgressions of Israel. I'm going to stop right there for a bit. Harness the steeds of the chariots, inhabitants of Lachish. Now, I'm going to bring up the map here and show you that this is one of the fortified cities of Judah that Rehoboam set up after the split of the other nations. It was to protect Jerusalem from attack from the southwest, from the area of the Philistines. So by putting in those fortified cities, it was showing they were trusting in armies and not in the Lord. Let's continue with verse 14. Therefore, you shall give parting gifts to Moresheth Gath. At the house of Akzib shall be a deceitful thing to the king of Israel. I will again bring a conqueror to you, inhabitants of Mareshah. The glory of Israel shall come to Adullam. Make yourself bald and cut off your hair for the children of your delight. Make yourself as bald as the eagle, for they shall go from you into exile. So let's go back to verse 14 now. Therefore, you shall give parting gifts to Moresheth Gath. In other words, that city, that part is going to be taken from Judah. They're going to lose that part. And again, this idea of the wordplay going on, the house of Aksib shall be a deceitful thing. That's part of the wordplay. The city, they sound similar, the city name and the Hebrew word for deceitful thing. And when it talks about the kings of Israel, they're talking about Judah now. So this gives people the thought that this part of the lament was written after Samaria had been destroyed, but that timing is unknown for sure. Verse 13, make a conqueror for you, inhabitants of Mareshah. The glory of Israel shall come to Adullam. Remember, that is the cave where David had to hide from Saul. So the glory of Israel, his kings, his leaders will be like David, who had to hide in a cave to be protected from those who would try to kill him. The last part. Make yourselves bald, cut off your hair. 3 lines focuses on the baldness, cutting of hair. They would be treated as animals. Their heads would be shaved and they would go off into exile, captive by another land. So we're going to wrap up here today. I know there's a lot in there. Oh, but before we do that, I said I was going to show you the map of everything. I showed it to you once already. And if you notice, most of those areas that are being spoken about here, Moresheth Gath, that is the place where Micah was from. Then you also see next to it is Lachish and a couple of the others there. Aksib is close to Moresheth Gath. All of those areas are in the same area. Okay, so Micah is prophesying, and he's speaking these names of these towns that are familiar to him in his area as he is speaking the word to the king. Now I'll wrap up. God bless you. We'll see you again tomorrow as we continue to hear more about the prophecy, looking at Micah chapter 2.